Chicago is the home of Rahm Emanuel, the city's current mayor, who is, of course, a leading figure in the centrist, some might say corporatist wing of the Democratic Party, former member of Congress, former chief of staff to President Barack Obama, and now the subject of some not so small controversy. Joining us now to talk about it is our good friend, the distinguished historian, writer, and commentator, Rick Perlstein. Rick is the author of Before the Storm and Nixonland and The Invisible Bridge. He is as well a writer and observer of national politics and Chicago politics. And he, like the mayor himself, is a resident of the city of Chicago. Rick, thanks for joining us.
Hi, RJ. Good to be here.
Well, listen, now you described, let's start with this. Rahm Emanuel, who basically, I'll speak for myself, represents everything I dislike about the current Democratic Party. You described him recently, you used the phrase sociopathic mayor. He's clearly the mayor. I mean, I think that's not up for dispute, but sociopathic, is that a little strong?
You know, I looked in the dictionary and, you guys can look and judge for yourself. But what inspired that particular designation was a breakfast I went to. Very striking moment when poor Rahm Emanuel had a breakfast interview scheduled with Mike Allen of Politico magazine. And it happened to happen the day after he fired the police chief. In the wake of this terrible video that was released, 400 days after the shooting of a 17-year-old who was seen, walking away from the cops, shot in cold blood, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The cops went and erased the security videos at the Burger King. A lot of the listeners will know this. In fact, you're on WCPT, so a lot of the listeners will know more about this stuff than I do, the Chicagoans. But so he has to do this interview. And I just listened to him lie and lie and lie, saying things like, homicides were down in 2014 when Chicago Magazine had done an absolutely devastating deconstruction of the statistics and proving that they were lying about that, lying about graduation rates, which they juke by putting kids into online classes that give them no education whatsoever, lying about how the reason he couldn't released this video was because there was a federal investigation by the FBI. Well, as a matter of fact, the Justice Department said they wouldn't mind if he released the video, so he lied about that. But the sociopathic part, the one that really put me over the top and really made that le mot juste for that particular event, was when the interviewer from Politico, Mike Allen, asked a kind of pointed question about the erasure of the evidence at the Burger King. And he said a certain Chicagoan had called for blah, 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 blah. And Rahm's response to that question was, well, this certain Chicagoan would appreciate it if you would pronounce his name correctly. And then he got a great laugh from kind of the elites who were in the room at this, it's Tony Social Club in the John Hancock Center, in the Sears Tower. And then that was it. He didn't even answer the question and said he made a joke. He got away with it, and I was left with my skin crawling.
Yeah, it sounds absolutely odious, and I don't know which is more horrifying about this story, Rick Perlstein, the kind of person who would make a joke about the cold-blooded murder of a teen, or the kind of group psychology that would get a mordant chuckle out of the joke and then drop the subject.
This group, was, the people who get invited to Politico breakfast, co-sponsored by Bank of America. He's losing them. This is his constituency. The other day, one of the local sites reported that at a ceremony for the retiring president of the Shedd Aquarium, which is one of our, big cultural institutions here, one of the board members, who was a bank executive, said that the mayor was going to make a proclamation or present this guy a plaque, in a couple months or something like that. If he was still mayor, if not, the governor would do it. And apparently, like there was kind of a visible kind of murmur in the room, a shudder. The forbidden had been spoken. The people who Rahm Emanuel rubbed shoulders with, who he gets his money from, are on the verge of casting this guy adrift. And the reason is plain. 51% of Chicagoans in a new poll think that he should resign his office. A massive rally yesterday at noon, which basically happened while he was giving a speech to the city council apologizing, is calling for his ouster. Civil disobedience in the streets day after day after day. And by the way, the folks who are doing the protests are mostly young, and they're very disciplined, and they're very smart, and they're really putting the pressure on. Something is happening in Chicago.
Well, that's exciting to hear. And just for the folks who may not know all the details, let me do a quick review. You tell me if I'm right or wrong. But first of all, we had this horrific shooting of the young man, Laquan McDonald, who was walking away, as you said, from the police. We had 400 days before the video was released. A lot of people feel if it had been released in a timely fashion, it might have affected Rahm Emanuel's reelection chances. We had Emanuel claiming that he didn't release it because he was asked not to by the Justice Department in order not to influence an ongoing investigation. It turns out that that's a complete lie, that, in fact, the Justice Department says they never asked him not to release the video. What's more, other reports have said the demand that the video not be released came from the mayor's office and not from anywhere else in the city government. So this seems to be the classic case of it's the cover-up.
Right. Well, actually, we left out one step.
Okay.
RJ, it's the money, right? Follow the money. Right after, one day after, in fact, the mayoral election. Last time I was on this show, I was talking about the mayoral election, which takes place in April in Chicago. Rahm Emanuel won re-election, and the next day it was announced that the city was paying out a $5 million settlement to a family of a young man, that was Laquan McDonald, who had been shot. And so it turns out that they paid out this $5 million before a lawsuit had even been filed. So it was absolutely plain to anyone who can add up 2 plus 2 that something was going on here involving a cover-up, that Rahm Emanuel was desperate not to have this family speak about what they had seen and what they knew. And now he's claiming that he never saw the video. So basically, the city is supposedly writing $5 million checks based on no evidence at all. And so that really, really, really is what's got folks in Chicago riled up and calling Rahm a liar and talking about a cover-up. Now, of course, since that video has been released, there have been not one but 2 more videos that have been released of police killings. One was a gentleman in custody who was tasered to death. Unfortunately for the city, that fella's father is a police chief in one of the suburbs. There was a gentleman that was in a case that was a little less clear-cut because he was, running from the scene of a crime. But we don't have summary executions yet for car theft, and even in Chicago. And I've heard tell of a third video that's been released. So basically, as we have the classic kind of drip, drip, drip that we see in a scandal before a public official is finally called to account and resigns.
Rick, we're talking with author Rick Perlstein about Rahm Emanuel and the controversies now swirling around him. I wrote a piece a long time ago about the dangers of schadenfreude in the political process and in political dissent. I'm going to make an exception to my own rule when it comes to Rahm Emanuel, number one. Number two, make the observation that when you've lost the political playbook breakfast sponsored by Bank of America crowd, as the old saying goes, you've lost America. But I will add this.
You've lost the percent of America, at least, which is, what counts.
But I will add this, that he has not lost everybody, because in a news report dated, I believe it was yesterday, this headline from NBC Chicago: Hillary Clinton voices confidence in Mayor Emanuel amid calls for his resignation.
Right.
What's
To be
that
fair,
all?
that I think that was like 3 days ago.
Oh, okay.
So it was
My
like
bad.
we have a couple drips after that.
Okay.
Yeah, doesn't it say something about the Democratic Party that this is a guy who's just been kicked upstairs since 1992 again and again and again? We have we have Rahm Emanuel, Obama's former chief of staff, the guy who said that Obama should give up on comprehensive health care reform because we didn't have a big enough chance of passage. This guy who's considered this big tough guy who turned out to be a coward who's running from every political fight, and he still has this kind of Democratic establishment closing ranks around him. Which why does Hillary Clinton do this? The political judgment is not encouraging for someone who might be president of the United States.
No, I would agree. And by the way, I would add to that I had read reports dating back to the 90s saying that when Rahm Emanuel was working for the Clinton administration, Hillary didn't like him, which was a nugget I clung to as one of the more positive, things I'd heard about her.
Right.
So one wonders I wonder anyway, what kind of calculation goes into sticking your neck out for a guy like this?
Yeah, I'm not in those weeds. I don't know. Thank God. But I did hear a story about like the first time he was over at the Clintons' house in Little Rock in 1991 or something like that, and how it was a story about how he didn't bus his plate or something like that. I mean, just something really kind of uncouth. Here's this junior staffer at the boss's house for the first time, and he, just somehow does something that's just completely socially inappropriate. Which, basically that's our Rahm,
Yeah, although I would have hoped it would have been for something more substantive. But, of course, and my point is not to go back to 1991, but just to say you wonder why somebody, Bernie Sanders has come out and said that anybody involved in suppressing this video, an elected office or not, clearly, or to me, suggesting Rahm as well, should resign. Others.
He's not involved either because the buck stops here. He has a terrible history of hiring criminals too. I mean, the CEO of the schools that he hired has been indicted for kickbacks, and it's really. I mean, I don't care if he knew directly or not. He still should resign.
You've studied at length and written about, for example, the Nixon presidency. And certainly, we saw there the trajectory from, these charges are absurd, and it was kind of agreed among the insiders that there was nothing to it, the third-rate burglary response and so on, to, well, maybe these charges have some merit, to this thing is turning against him, to, this guy's going to have to go. Is there parallel here? And if so, where are we on that cycle?
Well, in both cases, right, it's the tapes that does it, right?
Right.
That's what kills you. And of course, now there's a lot more tape, right? I mean, we're living in the age of the cell phone cam. And, everyone knows in Chicago that the police force is this completely corrupt institution. I mean, we know people have been on the verge of being electrocuted on death row in the state of Illinois because they were tortured into confessions,
right,
in the 80s by this guy, John Burge, who retired with a full pension. So now we have the cameras, like Richard Nixon with the Oval Office tapes, and we're just with Nixon it was only a metaphorical smoking gun. You hate to laugh, but we're talking about literal smoking guns here, smoking tasers.
Right.
We're seeing young, innocent, or at least unconvicted of any crime, young people being mowed down left and right. And this is really just the capstone, what's going on in the Chicago public schools, what's going on with the privatization of the city, what's going on with the cronyism, what's going on with the shockingly bad personnel decisions by this guy. I mean, Chicagoans know that the system that pay for their public transit, it's called Ventura, has been the biggest, it's kind of like our Obamacare website, but 10 times worse. And everyone hates it and the bus drivers hate it. Well, the guy who was in charge of that was the guy Rahm Emanuel chose to head the school after his schools chief was indicted. So this is what happens. This is how we have accountability in Chicago. You get a promotion and a raise.
Well, so I guess we'll just have to keep watching to see where this goes. But Rick Perlstein, writer and historian, This is an amazing story, amazing for the city of Chicago, amazing for the country. And thanks for coming on and talking about it.
Keep fighting, my brother.
You too.